Hey class, how's it going? Here we are again, and today we are going to kick off a series on the Renaissance. So let's just start off with that word, Renaissance. What does it mean? Renaissance literally means a rebirth or a revival. So this was really an age of adventure. So we have the voyages of Christopher Columbus and Ferdinand Magellan, and it was an age of curiosity. And there was this idea of possessing many talents. So a Renaissance man would be somebody who could do a lot of different things and do them well. So it's not like I dabble in this or I dabble in that, but I'm actually good at a lot of things. So one of the great Renaissance men of the Renaissance was Leonardo da Vinci. So he was a painter, a sculptor, an architect, an engineer, a scientist, and a musician. And so that's just one really, really excellent example. Another part of the Renaissance is a fascination with the cultures of ancient Greece and Rome. So just a revival of interest. So a lot of the subject matter from the Renaissance was drawn from ancient literature and mythology. Now, and I loved mythology growing up, Greek and Roman mythology. I thought they were really interesting stories. It was just really neat to think. In fact, somewhere behind me on that shelf is a book that I found in my sister's bookcase, and I grabbed it and started reading it, and that began my lifelong interest in mythology. So the people of the Renaissance took that more than just reading a book. They took it very, very far indeed. The dominant intellectual movement of the Renaissance was humanism, right? Humanism focuses on human life. So not so much on the afterlife, even though the majority of Europe is still, at this time, very much Christian. So for example, artists actually studied the human body and depicted it very realistically, rather than two-dimensionally. I remember reading about Michelangelo where he studied cadavers, which seems like, okay, kind of gross, honestly, but it makes sense. He was an artist, he was a sculptor, he wanted to know how the body was put together so he could build very lifelike sculptures. So, as a matter of fact, let's look at his most famous statue. So we're going to look actually at two different depictions of David. So we've got the idea of sort of a flat, emotionless David, and then we have the statue of David as carved by Michelangelo. And it is magnificent. Every detail has been thought out and carved out. It is really, really amazing. And it's realistically rather than two-dimensional. Same thing if we look at different depictions of the Virgin Mary and the Christ child. So we have a flat Middle Ages depiction versus this very beautiful and robust version from the Renaissance. Okay? So let's talk about the huge, humongous, big historical event that happened in the Christian faith during the Renaissance. And of course I mean the Reformation. This is kind of a big thing. What we want to know in our studies right now is that the church was no longer the sole proprietor of learning. So you don't have to go to a convent or a monastery to study, or to study music for that matter. Education became a symbol of status. So more are becoming educated, but it's still very much a symbol of status. So if you're dirt poor, you're not going to be going to school. But if you're very wealthy, you will be going to school because it's a status symbol. Another big thing that happened is the printing press. Like, what am I looking around? Is there a single book laying next to me? Well, they're all behind me. I was going to pick up something and make like a really good point about the printing press, but what I have here is not a book. The point stands though. all of a sudden, learning could spread. So we have education becoming a status symbol. And then we have the invention of the printing press. If I want music, I can go buy it. If I want to read something, I can go buy a book. I can learn something from the printed word. No longer do I have to spend hours doing illuminated manuscripts, right? So think of your classes today without the internet and without your computer. And then imagine that any book you owned was at least a month's wages, maybe more. And remember, everything was handwritten up to this time. So it's like the invention of the computer, only even more fundamental than that. It was a world changer, and it did indeed change the world. By 1500, 15 to 20 million books had been printed in Europe. That's a big deal. And where is music in all of this? It is front and center. Okay, let's talk about music in the Renaissance. As before, in the Middle Ages, musicians are still working in churches, courts, and towns. The church is still an important patron, but the courts are starting to move in on this. They're starting to get a piece of that. Courts competed for the finest composers, and they could have up to 60 musicians on staff. So singers, instrumentalists, and they might travel with their musicians. So a court music director might compose secular music for entertainment and then sacred music for the court chapel. Musicians had a much higher status and were earning more money than before. They still need patronage, but they're definitely no longer anonymous. They are writing music down and we're able to study that music. We know who they were. It's a big deal. All right, let's get into the characteristics of Renaissance music, starting with some of the things that we talked about before. So, words and music. First thing, vocal music is still the most important. And the humanism has led to more interest in language. Composers are becoming interested in expressing the emotion of the text. And word painting, which we are going to talk about later, is a really big part of this, especially in madrigals. When we start talking about texture, we're looking at mainly polyphonic. Okay, so we started out with Gregorian chant, monophonic. Then we went into organum, remember? The very beginning of polyphony just sounds like two people singing in harmony to us. Now, music is very much polyphonic, 4, 5, or 6 voice parts. They're using imitation, so polyphonic, and somebody will come in and somebody will repeat some things and somebody will repeat some other things. We do still have homophonic music in dance. It's very clear rhythm, so it's easier to dance to, makes sense. And just kind of throughout music, we might switch our musical texture to show contrast and portray the text. Because remember, we're still talking a lot about vocal music. When we get into rhythm and melody, everything sounds more full. We now have a solid foundation in the bass line. Chords are more stable. They don't want to make you feel on edge or uneasy. And this is the golden age of a cappella music, right? A cappella, vocals, that's it. They would approve of pentatonics, I think. We're having, I would say, a renaissance of a cappella vocal popular music right now. And it started with shows that featured groups like pentatonics. People are realizing how beautiful 4 or 5 or more singers can be. There are professional vocal groups that go and sing, do concerts, they make videos, and it's pretty amazing. So I'm a happy person because I love singing. When we are looking in choral music, we rarely see anything written for instruments right now. Pretty much golden age of a cappella. The 2 main forms of sacred music during the Renaissance are the Mass and the motet. And they are similar in style, but the Mass is longer. I used to always get these mixed up, and I still need a refresher every time I teach this class. So let's go through it. Motet is a choral work, polyphonic, and it's set to a sacred Latin text, which is not the Mass ordinary. Mass is a choral work, also polyphonic, but it is the 5 sections of the Mass ordinary, which remember, Kyrie, Gloria, Credo, Sanctus, and Agnus Dei. So motet, I kind of remind myself, it's basically like singing an anthem in church, set to Latin text, which is not the Mass ordinary. The Mass is the Mass, right? So basically, motet, Latin hymn, a very fancy hymn, and a Mass is like a collection of hymns that are specifically for parts of the Mass. So we're going to listen to some examples of each. First example is a composer you will be listening to in your streaming listening, Josquin des Prez, and he was alive from 1440 to 1521, and he was a master of Renaissance music, and he composed masses, motets, and secular vocal pieces. Remember, secular means not religious. So kind of all ends of the spectrum here. So let's listen to this. This is a Latin prayer to the Virgin. Okay, so what we hear is it's a cappella, it's 4 voices, it's very delicate, it's very serene. There is polyphonic imitation. So remember, polyphonic, interweaving melodies, and those melodies are imitating each other. That's all that means, polyphonic imitation. That polyphonic imitation, right, gives it a very flowing rhythm. So we don't feel like ding, 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 ding. It's very flowing with parts coming in at different times. The bass line, very important, is really giving a strong foundation to the music that we really didn't have before. And the chords sound full. So I want you to remember from the Renaissance that harmony is a byproduct of the interacting melodies. I said the same thing when we were talking about polyphony before. Harmony is a byproduct of interacting melodies. They're not sitting down and thinking, I'm going to write a 1 chord, and then a 4 chord, and then a 5 chord. Some of those typical, like a C major, and then I'm going to do an A major, and then I'm going to... No. They are very much thinking about writing interacting melodies with a pleasing result to the ear. Very important to remember. The next composer we're going to take a listen to is Palestrina. And super famous, 1525 to 1594. Years aren't important. What is important to remember is he was devoted to composing for the Catholic Church. And so he was centered in Rome, and he was a very, very important part of the Counter-Reformation with 104 masses and approximately 450 other sacred works. So talking about the Counter-Reformation. So we have the Reformation, then we get into the Counter-Reformation with the Council of Trent. And so they wanted to make some changes to church music. They wanted to remove things that were artificial and theatrical as they saw them. They didn't want any more pop or popular music, so no secular tunes, no noisy instruments or showy singing, no showing off. They wanted to cut down on the polyphony so that you can understand the words. Fair point. And they wanted to inspire religious contemplation. They want you to really be in a worshipful frame of mind when you are listening to the music in church. So let's listen to the Kyrie from the Pope Marcellus Mass, and let's see what we hear. Still polyphonic. We haven't talked Palestrina out of writing polyphony. And I heard sort of like an urban legend that it was once thought that this entire mass that he composed was what convinced the Council of Trent that polyphonic music still had a place in the church. So it is polyphonic. It is a cappella, right? 6 voices. It sounds much fuller than the Ave Maria did. The text is short and well known. So, Kyrie eleison, Christe eleison. That's it. The words are repeated, so that is definitely showing prayer. And each section starts out with a few voices and then adds more. So we have heightened emotion, and then that last section gets faster and louder and more dramatic. So definitely heightened emotion, which we just weren't getting that sort of excitement and heightened emotion from Gregorian chant. So a lot of changes now. Music is definitely starting to tap into communication of emotions. That's what we want to do when we make music. We want to communicate an idea. In the sense of church music, we want to communicate the words. Maybe the words from the Bible, maybe the words from a prayer. So composers are really starting to change and develop. Very, very important. All right, we're going to stop there for today, and we are going to pick up in the next lesson, and we will continue on with the Renaissance. Hope you have a great day, and I will see you in the next video.